You're being sold the idea that a home's value is simple: price, location, appreciation. Buy in the right city, wait long enough, and you'll be rewarded. That belief has powered real estate decisions for decades. But in 2026, there's a cost hiding in plain sight, one that rarely appears in listings, spreadsheets, or glossy marketing photos. Water. Not as a future problem, not as a political debate, but as a present, physical limit shaping which homes hold value and which quietly don't. A house can look perfect on paper and still be built on a fragile promise. The taps still run. The lawns are still green. Developers still break ground. And that's exactly why the risk is missed. Water scarcity doesn't arrive like a crash. It arrives through rising utility bills, infrastructure fees, insurance surcharges, and zoning decisions that quietly change what growth is allowed. Buyers obsess over interest rates, but rarely ask where the water comes from, how secure it is, or how much it will cost over 30 years. That's the betrayal. You're encouraged to sign a 30-year mortgage in places where the most basic input for daily life is finite, contested, and increasingly expensive. Officials reassure, projections sound optimistic, but physics doesn't negotiate. Rivers don't respond to confidence. Aquifers don't refill on press releases. When water becomes scarce, housing markets don't collapse overnight. They thin. Participation narrows. Costs creep higher until ownership stops feeling like security and starts feeling like exposure. This isn't about panic or apocalypse. It's about clarity. The real estate fantasy says location guarantees value. Reality says sustainability does. When water becomes unreliable or unaffordable, every other number in the deal changes, from resale demand to operating costs to livability. And those changes are already underway, even in cities advertising growth. This video isn't here to scare you. It's here to protect you. To surface the variable most buyers never check until it's too late. Because the most dangerous risks stay invisible while others celebrate, until it suddenly matters. Subscribe and hit the bell. This is the cost no one warns you about. Most people imagine housing markets break with noise. A headline, a crash, a moment when everyone agrees something went wrong. Water scarcity doesn't work like that. It breaks markets quietly, through friction, not failure. And once you understand the mechanics, the confusion disappears. You stop reacting to fear and start reading structure. That's the shift from observer to analyst, and it's the most important upgrade you can make right now. The first pressure point is single source dependency. When a city relies heavily on one river, one aquifer, or one reservoir, its housing market is only as resilient as that source. Redundancy creates stability. Dependence creates fragility. When drought hits or allocations are cut, the market doesn't crash. It hesitates. Buyers pause. Builders slow. Lenders quietly tighten assumptions. Next is imported versus local water. Imported water looks reliable until it isn't. Pipelines stretch hundreds of miles, crossing political boundaries and competing users. When shortages appear upstream, downstream cities don't get warned, they get rationed. Imported systems also carry higher costs, and those costs don't show up in listing prices. They show up later, in monthly bills that slowly reshape affordability. Then comes infrastructure escalation. Scarcity forces engineering. Desalination plants, pumping stations, treatment facilities, and emergency projects sound impressive, but they're expensive. Those costs don't get absorbed by governments forever. They're passed directly to residents through rate hikes, fees, and assessments. Water bills rise steadily, turning into a stealth mortgage layered on top of housing costs. Legal limits on growth follow. This is where belief finally collides with math. When regulators conclude there isn't enough water to support future development, permits stall or stop entirely. Growth assumptions vanish overnight. Housing values don't fall immediately, but momentum dies. Appreciation depends on expansion, and expansion depends on water that exists on paper and in reality. This leads to the most overlooked signal: utility bills as behavioral triggers. When basic services become unpredictable or expensive, Buyers hesitate emotionally before prices respond mathematically. Ownership stops feeling safe. Sellers wait. Transactions slow. Inventory builds quietly. Markets don't crash. They freeze. What ties these signals together is timing. None create panic alone. Together, they erode confidence. And confidence is what keeps housing markets liquid. Without it, prices stagnate, exits narrow, and recovery stretches longer than anyone expects. This lens works everywhere. Change the geography, the politics, even the climate. The mechanics stay the same: dependency, cost, constraint, behavior. Once you see those layers, reassurance without numbers loses power. Understanding this doesn't create fear, it removes it. You're no longer guessing, you're diagnosing, and diagnosis always beats reaction. Subscribe and hit the bell. Once you see this lens, you can't unsee it. Number 10 is Los Angeles, and this is where the illusion still feels strongest. The lawns are green, the pools sparkle, and the listings look untouched by crisis. From the outside, nothing appears wrong. But Los Angeles doesn't run on local water. It runs on distance, politics, and borrowed certainty. The city depends heavily on imported water from the Colorado River and the State Water Project, systems already under visible strain. When shortages appear, they don't show up as dry taps. They show up as rate hikes, surcharges, and infrastructure assessments quietly folded into monthly bills. Homebuyers focus on million-dollar price tags and miss the second invoice entirely. Water costs rise steadily, not dramatically, until living there feels heavier than expected. Buyers don't panic, they recalculate. They still qualify for mortgages, but long-term affordability starts to wobble. The danger in Los Angeles isn't collapse. It's normalization of higher costs that permanently reset who can stay. Number 9 is San Antonio, a city that feels affordable, grounded, and full of promise. Compared to coastal markets, it looks like relief. But San Antonio is making a single, enormous bet on one water source: the Edwards Aquifer. Nearly the entire city depends on it. Growth here has been explosive, and development keeps pushing directly over the aquifer's recharge zones, the very land that allows rain to refill the system. Every new subdivision adds pressure to the same underground reserve. During droughts, restrictions arrive fast. Lawns brown, tensions rise, and utility bills climb as the city scrambles to manage scarcity without admitting limits. Homes remain affordable on paper, but the long-term risk hides in dependence. Buyers aren't priced out by home values. They're boxed in by fragility. When a city's entire future rests on one declining source, confidence becomes conditional, and conditional confidence doesn't support stable appreciation. Number 8 is El Paso, and this is where the story turns uncomfortable. El Paso did almost everything right: conservation campaigns, reuse systems, desalination projects, long-term planning. On paper, it's a model city. And yet, that success comes at a price most buyers never calculate. As surface water from the Rio Grande becomes unreliable, El Paso leans harder on aquifers and expensive infrastructure to compensate. Massive treatment plants and advanced systems don't run on goodwill. They run on money. Water rates rise year after year to fund them, turning utility bills into a real financial burden for households. The homes here are affordable. The mortgages make sense. But the cost of maintaining water security keeps climbing, quietly reshaping affordability from the inside. This isn't failure through shortage. It's failure through expense. At a certain point, a city can conserve itself into unaffordability. What connects these three cities is not visible crisis. It's quiet arithmetic. Water stress enters housing markets sideways through monthly costs and long-term uncertainty rather than dramatic headlines. People don't flee. They hesitate. They stay longer in rentals. They delay buying. They question whether a place that looks livable today will feel comfortable for 30 years. This stage is the most deceptive. Everything still works. Taps flow, homes sell, cities expand. That normalcy feeds normalcy bias, the belief that tomorrow will resemble yesterday. But markets don't turn when people panic. They turn when enough people stop believing the math adds up. These Cities teach the same lesson in different accents. Imported water creates cost volatility. Single-source dependence creates fragility. Even responsible planning creates financial strain. Buyers can afford the house, but not the lifetime cost of staying. If you're listening closely, this isn't about avoiding cities. It's about recognizing when affordability is being eroded quietly, month by month, bill by bill. That erosion doesn't announce itself, it accumulates. Stay with me, because the pressure escalates from here. Number 7 is Salt Lake City, and this is where water stress stops being abstract and starts reshaping daily life in visible ways. The city still looks clean, orderly, and prosperous, framed by mountains that suggest abundance. But just miles away, the Great Salt Lake is shrinking at an alarming pace. As the lake recedes, it exposes a dry lakebed laced with decades of industrial contaminants. When winds pick up, toxic dust enters the air, affecting health, insurance risk, and long-term livability. At the same time, the lake's decline disrupts snowpack patterns in the surrounding mountains, directly threatening the region's primary water source. This isn't a future scenario. It's already happening. Homebuyers may still focus on median prices and neighborhood charm, but resale confidence quietly weakens when a city's air quality and water security are tied to the same failing ecosystem. Optimism lingers because the streets still look fine, yet the environmental feedback loop is tightening. Number 6 is San Diego, and this is where distance becomes the enemy. San Diego sits at the literal end of the water pipeline, importing nearly all of its supply from hundreds of miles away. That dependency was manageable when systems were stable and costs were predictable. In 2026, neither is true. As upstream shortages intensify, San Diego feels the pressure first and pays the price longest. Desalination plants now act as the city's insurance policy, converting ocean water into drinking water at massive energy and financial cost. Those costs don't stay abstract. They show up in some of the highest water bills in the country, rising taxes, and infrastructure fees quietly folded into homeownership. Insurance companies take note as well, factoring drought and fire risk into premiums that climb year after year. Homes still sell here, but buyers hesitate longer, running spreadsheets instead of falling in love. When the cost of water begins to rival a second mortgage, confidence erodes even in paradise. Number 5 is Cape Coral, Florida, and this is where the crisis becomes impossible to ignore. The city was built around water, marketed as a canal-lined dream with affordable access to waterfront living. But that same water now threatens its future. Cape Coral relies on a shallow freshwater aquifer, while saltwater from the Gulf slowly intrudes underground due to decades of overpumping. The result is contamination. That can't be reversed cheaply or quickly. Massive reverse osmosis plants are required to make water drinkable again, and those facilities demand constant investment. Residents pay through skyrocketing water rates and special assessments that catch many homeowners off guard. Insurance companies respond by raising premiums or pulling back entirely, wary of long-term exposure. Resale confidence weakens as buyers realize they're not just purchasing a home, but inheriting a costly engineering problem beneath it. The canals still sparkle, but they no longer signal value. They signal vulnerability. What ties these cities together is visibility. The stress is no longer hidden in spreadsheets or future projections. You can see it in shrinking lakes, sprawling desalination facilities, contaminated aquifers, and rising insurance bills. Water scarcity now touches air quality, taxes, utilities, and long-term resale potential all at once. This is the phase where optimism starts to lag reality, because people remember better years. They remember when lakes were fuller, bills were lower, and water felt guaranteed. That memory delays adjustment, but it doesn't stop it. Buyers in these markets don't panic. They pause. They ask different questions, not just about price, but about sustainability. Can this system support growth? Will costs stabilize or compound? What happens if one more variable breaks? Those questions slow demand without drama. Homes sit longer. Sellers adjust expectations quietly. Markets don't crash. They stall. This is where denial usually breaks, not because of headlines, but because lived experience changes. when air quality warnings appear more often, when utility bills rise faster than incomes, when insurance becomes uncertain, confidence drains steadily. These cities still function, but they no longer feel frictionless. And friction is enough to change trajectories. Understanding this stage isn't about fear, it's about clarity. Water scarcity doesn't announce itself with empty taps. It announces itself through cost, complexity, and hesitation. Once those signals align, outcomes narrow, regardless of how beautiful or familiar a place looks. Subscribe and hit the bell, because this is where denial usually breaks. Number 4 is Las Vegas, and this is where efficiency becomes a trap rather than a solution. From the outside, Las Vegas looks like a triumph of modern water management. The city recycles nearly every drop of indoor water, enforces strict conservation rules, and operates one of the most disciplined systems in the country. Lawns are replaced, fountains are regulated, and residents are monitored down to sprinkler heads. On paper, it looks responsible. In reality, it reveals something more dangerous. There is no margin left. Nearly all of southern Nevada's water comes from a single source, the Colorado River stored in Lake Mead. Conservation has already been pushed to its limits, which means there is no easy next step. When a system is operating at maximum efficiency, any additional stress doesn't get absorbed, it gets felt immediately. Home values here aren't threatened by waste but by fragility. Growth continues, tourism continues, but the buffer that protects long-term confidence is gone. When buyers realize that the city's brilliance is a finely balanced equation with no room for error, hesitation replaces excitement. Number 3 is Scottsdale, and this is where scarcity becomes selective. Scottsdale is wealthy, polished, and meticulously planned, which leads many to assume it is insulated from the desert's limits. But water scarcity here doesn't disappear. It gets rationed by privilege. The city holds secure water rights, and when drought intensified, it protected itself by cutting off neighboring communities that depended on its supply. That decision was legal, deliberate, and revealing. It showed exactly how this region will behave under stress. Those inside the boundary remain protected, while those outside are left scrambling. For real estate, this creates a moral and financial fracture. Buying here isn't just about luxury, it's about betting that your access remains protected forever. That assumption carries risk. As scarcity deepens, political and social pressure grows. Insurance, taxes, and infrastructure costs rise to defend that protection. Wealth doesn't eliminate the problem, it concentrates it. And when a market depends on exclusivity rather than abundance, its future becomes narrower, not stronger. Number 2 is Phoenix, and this is where structural limits became official. In a rare moment of honesty, state authorities reviewed long-term aquifer models and admitted what many suspected. There is not enough groundwater to support continued growth. As a result, new development approvals were halted in large areas that relied on pumping alone. This wasn't speculation or activism. It was a government ruling based on math. For real estate, this changes everything. Appreciation relies on expansion, new buyers, new neighborhoods, and new demand. When growth is legally capped, the engine that drives long-term price increases weakens permanently. Existing homes still have water today, but their value is tied to a future that has been partially canceled. Buyers don't panic, they recalibrate. Builders pause. Investors hesitate. Confidence erodes quietly as people realize that innovation can't manufacture rainfall and wealth can't refill aquifers. What connects Las Vegas, Scottsdale, and Phoenix is finality. These aren't markets waiting for the next cycle. They are markets confronting physical limits. Government admissions, legal rulings, and hydrological models remove optimism from the equation. You can debate policy, technology, or politics, but you can't negotiate with water that isn't there. When growth stops being assumed, real estate stops behaving the way people expect. Prices don't collapse overnight, but they lose momentum. Time on market stretches. Risk premiums rise. Demand becomes cautious instead of emotional. This is why these cities matter so much. They sit at the epicenter where belief finally meets constraint. They show that innovation, wealth, and ambition don't override physics. They also reveal how quickly narratives change once official limits are acknowledged. If you're buying into these markets, you're not just buying a home. You're buying into a system that has already admitted its ceiling. That doesn't mean catastrophe is imminent, but it does mean the rules have changed. Understanding that shift is the difference between assuming safety and evaluating sustainability with clear eyes. Subscribe and hit the bell, because the epicenter always matters most. Paying attention now creates options later, while ignoring structural limits forces rushed decisions when flexibility disappears and markets reprice faster than confidence can recover fully. Again. Number 1 is New Jersey, and this is where the story stops being about politics or climate headlines and becomes purely mathematical. For decades, New Jersey sold itself as safe, dense, and indispensable, a place where high taxes bought stability and proximity guaranteed value. But by 2026, that promise is quietly breaking. Not because taps have run dry, but because the system supporting them is exhausted. New Jersey sits at the edge because its buffers are gone. Financial reserves are thin, pension obligations loom like fixed gravity, and taxes are already near the ceiling of what households can tolerate. Water infrastructure here is old, expensive, and relentlessly deferred. Pipes leak, treatment plants need upgrades, and every fix requires borrowing or higher fees. That cost doesn't arrive as a crisis. It arrives as steady pressure layered onto already stretched homeowners. Housing feels the stress immediately. Property taxes rise to fund obligations that can't be postponed. Utility bills climb to support infrastructure that can't fail. Mortgage payments stay high while affordability erodes from every side. Buyers don't panic, they hesitate. Sellers don't rush. They wait. Transactions slow not because demand vanished, but because confidence did. This is the betrayal. New Jersey was supposed to be different. Dense development meant efficiency. Older systems meant maturity. High income meant resilience. But resilience without flexibility is illusion. When pensions absorb growth, when reserves disappear, and when water systems require constant capital just to function, the math stops working. Every year becomes a trade-off instead of progress. What makes New Jersey the warning isn't mismanagement alone. It's convergence. Aging infrastructure, fiscal exhaustion, tax flight, and housing strain all press at once. Population loss doesn't need to be dramatic to matter. Even small outflows shrink the base, supporting enormous fixed costs. Raising taxes accelerates exits. Cutting services reduces livability. Borrowing delays pain but deepens it. Options narrow quickly. This isn't a local failure, it's the first domino. New Jersey shows what happens when systems run without margin for too long. It proves that collapse doesn't require drought headlines or empty reservoirs. It only requires obligations that grow faster than capacity. When that happens, value erodes quietly until adjustment becomes unavoidable. If this feels uncomfortable, it should. Because New Jersey isn't unique, it's early. Other states carry similar burdens, just with a little more time left on the clock. Seeing this now isn't about fear, it's about recognition. Once you understand that math always wins, you stop trusting reputation and start evaluating sustainability instead. What happens here foreshadows decisions every homeowner, renter, and investor will face as infrastructure, demographics, and finances collide across America in coming decades ahead. Subscribe and hit the bell, because this isn't theoretical anymore. If there's one thing these cities have taught us, it's that collapse doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with sirens or headlines. It shows up as math that no longer works and confidence that quietly drains away. When you zoom out, all of these places share the same warning signals, and once you learn to see them, you can apply this lens anywhere, not just to the cities we covered. Start with housing prices versus wages. When prices rise faster than incomes for too long, the market becomes dependent on belief instead of buyers. That belief holds until it doesn't. And when it breaks, activity freezes before prices ever fall. Then look at pension and debt loads. Obligations locked in decades ago don't care about today's economy. They demand funding every year, squeezing homeowners through taxes and fees that never show up in listing photos. Next is federal funding, dependence. When a city or state relies heavily on outside money to balance its books or maintain infrastructure, stability becomes conditional. A budget shift or policy change far away can suddenly reshape local reality. Pair that with industry concentration and the risk compounds. When too many jobs depend on one sector, a single slowdown ripples through housing, spending, and population all at once. Insurance and climate exposure add another layer. Rising premiums, shrinking coverage, and climate stress don't need to make a place unlivable to damage its housing market. They just need to make ownership unpredictable. Buyers hesitate when they can't forecast costs, and hesitation is poison for appreciation. Finally, watch population movement. People leaving slowly matter more than people arriving loudly. Outflows shrink the tax base while fixed costs stay the same, tightening the system year by year. None of this is meant to scare you, it's meant to arm you. When you understand these signals, you stop chasing hype and start evaluating durability. You realize that safety isn't about reputation or headlines, it's about balance, flexibility, and margin for error. Now, I want to hear from you. Which state or city do you think is closest to the edge next, and why? Drop your prediction in the comments and let's compare notes. Subscribe and hit the bell because I'll track the next break before it's obvious. Awareness early is leverage, and leverage is what keeps you ahead of cycles that quietly punish those who wait too long. Trust me,